Welcome to the PDB Situation Report. I'm Mike Baker, your eyes and ears on the world stage. Let's get briefed. We'll kick off with a look at events in the Middle East, most notably the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed by a hidden explosive device in Tehran while attending the swearing-in of Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian. We'll be joined by senior fellow Behnam Taleblu from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies to discuss the fallout. Later in the show, Venezuela's government is cracking down on any resistance to President Nicolás Maduro, announcing hundreds of arrests following this week's election. Okay, it wasn't really an election, but whatever you want to call the bogus process, evidence suggests that Maduro lost it decisively. Wall Street Journal South American Bureau Chief Juan Ferrero will bring us the latest on that. But first, the Situation Report spotlight. Iran is vowing retaliation for the assassination of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. Now, according to a report in the New York Times, Haniyeh was killed using an explosive device covertly hidden weeks before the assassination took place. The bomb was concealed in a guest house in a supposedly secure IRGC compound in a wealthy Tehran neighborhood where Haniyeh was known to stay. Now, according to anonymous Iranian and American sources, the explosive device was reportedly concealed in the guest house some 2 months ago and detonated remotely once he, Haniyeh, was inside his room. The fact that the bomb was smuggled inside the guest house, which was under the protection of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, indicates a shocking breach of security for the IRGC. The Iranian government and Hamas say Israel carried out the assassination. Now, Israel has neither confirmed nor denied its involvement. Haniyeh's death is a dramatic blow to Hamas, eliminating its most public figure who headed up the group's political operations while living a lavish lifestyle overseas. And by lavish, I mean Kanye had a net worth reported to be approximately $4 billion, money which he and his Hamas leadership cohorts have pocketed over the years from funds that were actually meant for the well-being of the Palestinian people. In addition to Kanye, Israel also eliminated a top Hezbollah commander, Fuad Shukr, this week, following a deadly attack late last week which claimed the lives of a dozen children and teenagers on an Israeli football pitch near the border with Lebanon. Joining me now for more on this is senior fellow from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Behnam Taleblu. Behnam, listen, thank you very much for taking the time to join us again today. It's very timely given that, and you correct me if I'm wrong, we seem like we're extremely close to a potential direct conflict between Iran and Israel.
Great to be with you, Mike. Always a pleasure. No, you're absolutely right. There is a quote-unquote public mourning ceremony that'll end in a couple hours from now, Tehran time, which is 8.5 hours ahead of East Coast time. And then at any time past the end of that public mourning time, the regime could take what it calls a hard revenge. This is the same kind of language that Khamenei, the country's supreme leader, and that's a title meant to be taken rather literally, as well as the military establishment, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, have all promised, and they used this language back in January 2020 when the U.S. killed Iran's chief terrorist Qasem Soleimani in Iraq with a drone strike. The regime left the shadows then, fired ballistic missiles publicly, overtly, and directly from its territory against American bases in Iraq. Fast forward to this April, the regime did that again for the first time, a historic first direct strike against Israel. And we have a Persian saying, Mike, when your fear erodes, we say, your fear has dripped away. And it kind of talks about how you can be emboldened to do something. And the fact that the regime survived that round, and unfortunately, in my view, I think won that last round with Israel, because Israel could not claim its attack on Iranian radar facilities in Isfahan, while Tehran absolutely did claim its 300 missiles and drones, most of which were intercepted, by the way. Means that it's kind of whet the appetite of Iran's theocrats, that when they're put in the box, they will be able to lash out this way. And so both for political reasons and military reasons, I think this will be a rough couple of days ahead.
Okay, now I know this is, wandering off into speculation territory, but based on all your experience watching Iran, watching the region, what do you think their retaliation will look like?
I certainly think April 13 set an important benchmark. And during that attack, the regime launched three different types of munitions directly from its territory. One were suicide drones, the famous Delta Wing Shahed class drones, which, as you know, the Russians are using in Ukraine. The 131 and the 136, those are two variants of basically kamikaze low and slow flying drones propelled by a piston. That's one. Two is land attack cruise missiles. The regime didn't fire many of these, but this is basically a much more effective munition that flies, parallel with the surface of the earth. And then one missile that goes high and fast, ballistic missiles. And the regime mostly fired liquid-fueled ballistic missiles. I think the April 13 attack sets an important benchmark and baseline for us to understand, because that, in my view, was the regime pressing the gas and the pedal at the same time. Remember, there was a 12-day public lead-in where even outlets like CBS News were able to guess the exact weapons Iran would be using. The regime was taking them out of storage, fueling them, leaving them there, reportedly telegraphing the attack. I think we may have a much shorter window today, plus one additional complicating factor, which is that because it was the head of Hamas killed in Iran, and because it was a major Hezbollah operative killed in Beirut, you're likely going to have other elements from this Iran-backed axis of resistance join in as well. And if about 100 ballistic missiles and I don't know how many, 150, 200 drones were insufficient to overwhelm Israeli and allied air and missile defenses before, perhaps further layering that attack with something from Iraqi Shia militias, the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in Gaza, or Hezbollah in Lebanon. So I think you're likely going to have multi-front participation. This is a phenomenon the Israelis call unification of the fronts, as something that we know they've long feared and worried about. And it'll mean that if the U.S. is going to perform the same role it did in the past, and we have comments from Secretary of Defense Austin that hint that the U.S. would do this already, we're going to have to surge in more assets, have really great ISR, and then also do more than just engage in deterrence by denial, in my view. We may actually have to engage in deterrence by punishment, because if the regime thinks it'll keep winning these rounds, it'll continue moving out of the shadows and become a more effective hybrid warfighter.
Do you think the current administration, the Biden administration, would take direct action, meaning aside from providing munitions and resource support, intelligence support, would they take direct action against Iran?
All else equal, I think not. And I don't believe that's just my assessment. I think that's the assessment of Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah. I think he's even said this in the past, that, the Americans will be restraining Israel. The Iranians haven't said it this directly, but it's baked into their assumption. And that is quite worrisome because, constantly engaging in this much more expensive architecture of deterrence by denial, well, that means the adversary is really only losing the value of the missile or the rocket or the mortar or the drone that they fire. But if you kind of academically threaten that which they hold dear, then, you could be able to, flip the script on them, if you will. But I think it's unfortunately Iran and the allies of Iran, this axis of resistance, this correct understanding of not just this Biden administration, but three different administrations trying to push away from the region, and the ability of our adversaries to read that and to take the title of Michael Hayden's book, Playing to the Edge, to play to the edge on that is what really got us in this scenario. There are some kind of conspiracy theorists and people who say, well, the strike may have been done by Israel to drag the U.S. into a conflict. I don't necessarily see that. This is something the Israeli political leadership promised to do right after October 7, which was to go after the Hamas political and military leadership.
Yeah. Now, I think the previous direct attack by Iran against Israel appeared to be, and intelligence kind of indicates that it was, as you implied, telegraphed to some of the other regional players. And it almost appeared as if they understood that information would then make its way to the U.S. and to Israel. And so this was, it was, I don't want to say it was sort of a kabuki dance, but there was some theater in that previous attack. Do you worry that what's happening or what's going to happen next isn't that, but it's in other words, I mean, it's not a one-off. It's perhaps leading to the next step in a conflict, which is a continued effort to perhaps just end this once and for all?
Well, I think it's still much more incremental or graduated, but the baseline from where we're starting is already a very, very dangerous place. Just one note on the April 13th. I liken it to putting your foot on the gas and the brakes at the same time. So it was telegraphed, but it was lethal. They wanted to be seen doing it. They got political benefits from using military force, but they also wanted to destroy and they also wanted to kill. But then now when we look at what are the other drivers of Iranian escalation, they're embarrassed. You're absolutely right to talk about the breaches of security. You've had Taliban officials, I think, within the past hours now saying that Israel and Iran are two sides of the same coin, basically saying that the regime in Tehran was complicit for the killing of someone that the Taliban had called a martyr, Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas. So there's all of these different drivers trying to get the regime to flex its muscles. And unfortunately, I think this axis is very good at using military means to accomplish political ends. That's not something that the US and Israel are quite good at. We're good at using military means to achieve military ends. And then the politics has not always followed, as the past 20 years in the Middle East have shown for us.
Behnam, do you mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, Behnam, but when you say that the Taliban was essentially saying that Iran was complicit in this assassination, were they referring to, they think that they actually played a role in allowing it to happen, or were they referring to the fact that there was just a massive security breach on the compound?
I think it was actually the former. There's great ideational enmity between, Khomeini's 12 Shiite Iran and radical Sunni Salafist jihadist Taliban. It doesn't mean that these guys haven't coordinated with one another. It doesn't mean that they won't knife each other and shake hands every couple of years. But the baseline ideological difference is there. And this has been a long-held view of actually a lot of radical Sunni jihadist organizations. That view has not impeded them from working occasionally with the Ministry of Intelligence or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. But this statement was a direct ideational attack on the governing ideology of the Islamic Republic and basically likening it to someone else that they believe also is, for lack of a better word, the little Satan, to take Iranian political parlance here.
Yeah, I mean, I think people intuitively understand just how complex and layered the problems are out in this region, but maybe they don't. We sometimes are always looking. I think as Americans, we tend to look for this most simple solution, right? It's like listening to a news segment where you've got 3.5 minutes, so let's have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and tell a simple story. And I've been doing this a long time, and I'm always amazed at just how complex the relationships and conflicts are in this region. Behnam, if you would please stay right there. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back with more on this. Every day we hear more about surveillance and how our right to privacy is being infringed upon. And it's true. It feels like we're living in a world where nothing is truly private anymore. Most of us, frankly, for the sake of convenience, hand over our personal information without a second thought, signing up for services, shopping online, or using social media. But this convenience comes at a cost. It's time for us now to take a stand and fight back for our right to privacy. One tool that's been essential for me in this fight is the all-in-one privacy app, MySudo. It's an app that lets you create multiple digital identities with separate phone numbers and emails so you can keep your personal information private. In this age of constant surveillance, having MySudo is crucial. Look, for my listeners, I've got a special deal. Go to mysudo.com/Mike Baker and use code Mike Baker to get 30 days free on a Sudo Pro yearly subscription. Take back your privacy with MySudo. Trust me, it's worth it. Welcome back to the PDB Situation Report. Let me bring back our guest, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Behnam Taleblu. Behnam, this is going to be perhaps an odd question, but given all your experience and how long you've been dealing with and working around this region, what was your initial reaction when you heard about the assassination of Kanye?
Believe it or not shocked. Believe it or not shocked. I think it's a sharp contrast. 12 hours ago, this guy is chanting death to America, death to Israel. 12 hours later, I think the Iranian press put his death at about 2 a.m. Tehran time. I was not shocked. Now, I didn't know the method. There was great debate. Was an assassin sent? Was he poisoned? Was it a bomb that was planted? Or was it a projectile that was fired? Ultimately, we learned it was a bomb that was planted. But immediately, I was reminded of the comment of a former Iranian Minister of Intelligence. I believe his name is Ali Younisi. And fun fact for those Iran watchers out there or Middle East watchers, the Minister of Intelligence in every cabinet in the Islamic Republic actually has to be a cleric, and the person has to be directly appointed with the consultation of the supreme leaders. So this goes as veneer of this system. This is a very kind of highly securitized system.
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you're good. I just heard a slight echo. Sorry. And what came to my mind is his comments where he said that essentially no Iranian security official should sleep safely at night. He was talking about the high degree of Mossad penetration. And that's a heck of a thing of a former intel minister to say that no official should be sleeping soundly at night. That the adversaries of the regime had been able to infiltrate many of the regime's security services. And when you look at the track record of authoritarianism in that country, you layer that on top of this, it's clear to me that the people that they promote from mid-level management and above are not, masters in the tradecraft or have this certain kind of intel competence, but these guys are people with zeal and ideology. And that's precisely how you get the Swiss cheese-like situation of the Iranian security apparatus today. When it's weak at home, it tries to project strength abroad. And then at home, the only good a lot of these forces are, the only thing that these forces can do really is engage in that massive domestic repression that we've seen of the Iranian populace. They can't even secure their own borders.
Yeah, no, from an operational perspective, which is, I guess, how I tend to look at everything, it was a solid hit. The intel that allowed that to happen, the access that allowed that to happen was extremely impressive. So I'm just looking at it from a distance, from an operational perspective. Talk to me a little bit about it, if you could. The new Iranian president, he was obviously, there was a lot of talk about, well, he's the only moderate candidate, and look at that, now he's installed as the president. Tell me what you know about him.
So this guy has basically been promoted, Masoud Pezeshkian. He's a parliamentarian, he's a medical doctor. Like most of the regime's political and military elite, he served in the Iran-Iraq war at that point as a medic. He cut his teeth in that conflict. And despite much of this framing of him as a reformist, he's from the wing of the quote-unquote reformist faction of the Islamic Republic that is very statist. It's not about actually changing the way things are done. It's about changing the veneer of the way things are done. And this has really been the only element of the reform movement that's been permitted over the past two decades to even have a marginal, if not only that voice in the system. So this is someone here who's not there to change business. He knows where his bread is buttered. Multiple times this guy has thanked the Supreme Leader for keeping him in the race. Wink, wink. We think the Supreme Leader may have been the one who backed his candidacy from the get-go. But ultimately, this guy, in my view, is a human shield against a more united Western pressure policy. Under the past 3 years of the Raisi government, the budget was out of control. And while the regime was trying to rope-a-dope U.S. military partners in the region to engage in diplomacy with Iran, countries like UAE, countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Azerbaijan, at that time the Iranians joined the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS organization. Nonetheless, the Europeans and the Americans had collaborated together on a host of sanctions regimes. The Iranian provision of drones to Russia got the Europeans to be actually quite tough on the non-proliferation front, on the arms transfer front. The massive crackdown after the 2022-2023 Women Life Freedom movement got at least 10 to 12 rounds of European sanctions against the Iranians. Last October, the Europeans kept over 200 missile, military, and nuclear designations on their sanctions list they were supposed to get sanctions relief to. And so in faced with all of this, I think the regime was looking for a facelift for someone who would bring a different style rather than a different substance. And with respect to the thing that orients and animates much of the West, which is Iran's nuclear program, This guy is there to function as a human shield against the deadline that we have coming up in that Iranian nuclear deal, the JCPOA, that is October time per the UN, that the participants of the deal can engage in something called snapback, where they basically scrap the legal mechanism of the deal and the UN resolution around it altogether, and they bring back all the older multilateral rounds of pressure and economic sanctions, and even the baseline understandings of like no enrichment in Iran, no missile testing in Iran, no arms transfers to or from Iran, and use that as a baseline for a bigger, better Iran policy. And I think the Iranians understand this, and they will try and political runarounds as possible. And
so essentially installing,
essence, I think this guy is going to run the clock.
So essentially installing him as window dressing. Do you think this is a tough question, I know, and it's also a soft science, but do you think the average Iranian citizen is pragmatic and views it in that light? Or do they feel as if perhaps putting him in place could lead to some changes?
In fact, I think the vast majority of the Iranian citizens didn't even vote. The fact that the regime had to artificially inflate the electoral numbers between the first round and the second round. The first round had the lowest ever turnout in the 45-year history of the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The population really since 2017 has been talking about the two words that Washington is afraid to use in its Iran policy discussion, which is regime change. You know, for a very long time, the population used to come out in relatively high numbers and vote, try to vote for the least bad candidate in their mind, try to vote for the candidate furthest away from the security establishment. All of that failed. And with the consistent overpromise and underdelivery of the reform movement and the basically takeover of the state by the security apparatus, the population has chosen to look to the street and not the ballot box to make its voice heard, which is why we get these major boom and bust cycles of protest that we've seen since 2017, and most recently with the Women Life Freedom protest. We're certainly going to see more of that, in my view. But this guy was also promoted to the helm, Masoud Pezeshkian, not to extend a hand to this opposition, be it abroad or at home, but to try to stymie them, to try to fracture them, and to hope that by his change in tone and the facelift that he may provide the regime, that the opposition would lose steam, that the ability and the desire to go out on the street would lose steam. But lest we forget, a lot of these shocks are economic, ecological, foreign policy. So it's still very much a tinderbox.
Yeah. Now we're getting close to running out of time. I want to be mindful of your time. So I'm going to ask you a question that probably would take an endless amount of time to answer, but we've got a very short period here. With the conflict right here staring us in the face, the potential Iranian retaliation, possible input from their proxies, looking down the road, what needs to happen? And I know this is not a fair question to ask you when we have little time, but what needs to happen to get us to a point where we could actually have peace or stability in this relationship, in this region?
It might be bitter medicine, but I think so long as you have the government of the Islamic Republic led by the hardened men who are at the helm of that regime today, you're not going to have peace and stability. And in the times where you may have lulls in the conflict or lulls in the threat vectors, those lulls would have to be achieved by the regime extorting you. It's basically what they did to Saudi Arabia. They had 10 years of the Houthis firing missiles at the Saudis. And then after that, the Iranians came in and had that little diplomatic deal. They opened up their embassy again. And then now, despite the multi-front war, the Houthis are not firing missiles at the Saudis. But it's forever a sword of Damocles that the regime can dangle over the head of the Saudis if things go sideways again. So I think that is something that we have to keep at the front of our minds, that this regime is looking to extort many in the region, is looking to push the Americans out of the region, and is looking to continue its ideological war with Israel in the region. And in that situation, there's really a limited number of things that we can do that will not come with a certain amount of cost. But number one has to be no own goals. Not with our regional partners, we have to make sure we have their back, and not with our transatlantic partners. And then together we can build a better baseline Iran policy. Things that are required for this are snapback. We need the legal authorities push for tougher sanctions against the Iranians. We need the legal authorities to, block the transshipments and block the weapons proliferation that is basically on steroids now. Iranian drones can be found in 4 different continents today. That's a huge problem. Many of these proxies have Iranian projectiles like missiles. That's a huge problem. And then ultimately, we need to get much better in the deterrence by punishment game. And so long as we don't play that game, the regime is going to continue this death by a thousand cut strategy against us and against our partners, while ultimately trying to develop the ultimate deterrent weapon for itself, which is its nuclear program. And that would be a very toxic situation, and one that the time actually is running out on to avoid.
Yeah, I think talking about tougher sanctions, I think talking about dealing with them in the manner that you're discussing, that won't happen as long as the U.S. administration continues to put Iran appeasers in key positions within the government. But that makes me sound churlish and cynical. Behnam Taleblu, listen, senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, thank you again for joining us today. I hope that when we call, that you'll pick up the phone again, because I suspect that this problem's not going away anytime soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Absolutely, Behnam. Take care. Coming up next, we turn to Venezuela, where dictator Maduro continues to cling to power despite strong evidence that he was defeated in this week's presidential election. Wall Street Journal South American Bureau Chief Juan Ferrero will join us for more on that. Stay with us. Hey, if you're a listener to the PDB, well, you know there's a lot going on in the world today, and by that I mean a lot. Authoritarian regimes on the march, wars overseas, and political turmoil across the globe. This is why now more than ever, you should support those on the right side of history. Blackout Coffee is committed to your values, supporting constitutional rights, and certainly supporting those on the front lines, the troops, local law enforcement, and frankly, all hardworking Americans. I'm proud to recommend Blackout Coffee. This is a coffee company that is 100% committed to American traditional values. From sourcing the beans to the roasting process, customer support, and shipping, they've got an incredible work ethic and are dedicated to promoting your principles, and they accept no compromise on taste or quality. Check out blackoutcoffee.com/PDB and use coupon code PDB for 20% off your first order. Ditch those other guys. Just get rid of them, right? Focus on Blackout Coffee because they remain true to your values. That's blackoutcoffee.com/PDB. Use coupon code PDB for 20% off your first order. As they say around here, be awake, not woke. Protests are continuing across Venezuela after the government-controlled electoral authority declared dictator Nicolás Maduro the winner. Oh, look at that. Despite strong indications and evidence that the opposition candidate had actually won by a significant amount. Now, despite international efforts to pressure Maduro, the regime has launched a severe crackdown on the opposition. Government security forces have detained volunteer poll watchers who monitored the election, and Maduro is now urging Venezuelans to report protesters who question his re-election. How very dictator-like of him. Government officials and civil society groups report that over 1,000 people have been arrested and at least 16 have been killed in mass protests since the election results were announced. Maduro's Electoral Council says he defeated challenger Edmundo Gonzalez by 7 percentage points to win another term in office, but has refused to publish voting data to support the claim. However, independent exit polling suggests that Gonzalez captured twice as many votes as Maduro. On Thursday, Venezuela's main opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, wrote in an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal, "I am writing this from hiding, fearing for my life, my freedom, and that of my fellow countrymen from the dictatorship led by Nicolás Maduro," end quote. Now, for more on this developing situation, very pleased to welcome our next guest, Wall Street Journal South American Bureau Chief Juan Ferrero. Juan.
Great to be here.
Thank you very much. And I want to say, look, I know you're extremely busy, so taking some time out to talk with us here at the Situation Report is very much appreciated. If you could, let's start with sort of being at the 30,000-foot level. If you could give our viewers an overall understanding of what's happened here in the past several days.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think we need to kind of lay out a little bit of the background in the sense that Maduro was up for re-election this year. And so he had to do something, either call off the election, hold an election, arrest his opponents. They opted to go with an election. They spent a lot of money. They control the media. They arrested a lot of opposition activists. I think some people in the regime actually thought that they would win. But in the end, the vote on Sunday was overwhelmingly for Edmundo Gonzalez, who's a former diplomat who kind of became sort of the accidental candidate in the sense that Maduro had already arbitrarily set aside and barred two candidates from running against him. Even though polls showed that Edmundo would win by a big margin, they went ahead with the election. And of course, afterwards, it became clear that night and into Monday morning that actually what had happened was that Gonzalez had won by a very significant margin. Since then, the Venezuelan opposition has actually published the actual tally sheets from the voting stations. Now, how do they have that? That's because in Venezuela, you were permitted to have what they call testigos, or literally witnesses, in each of the voting stations. So these people were able to get these actas, as they're called, which are these tally sheets, tabulations, and able to show exactly how the vote went down. In the end, they were able to get about 70% of these tabulations, which also underscores that there were a lot of people, possibly from the military, possibly from even the ruling Socialist Party, who helped get some of these tabulations out into opposition hands. This data went into a database. Anybody can go in there with their Venezuelan ID and see how they voted, see how it turned out on the actas or the tally sheets. Anyway, it's an overwhelming victory. Maduro was not pleased that this was all made public, although by law, it should be made public. I mean, Venezuelan law permits this. And so there has been a hard line crackdown in the last 5 days.
And I mean, this is not a surprise statement, I suppose.
Right now, the regime is basically closing the door on journalists. You know, journalists who went into Venezuela only had a few days to be there. They were supposed to be out, I think, a couple of days ago in terms of their flights have been canceled, flights in and out have been canceled, etc. And I think it's going to be sort of airtight. You know, it's going to be hard to get in. It's going to be hard to get information from there. Having said that, Venezuelans are very democratic. I mean, they knew that this was likely going to happen, and they voted in huge numbers. People flew to Venezuela to cast their ballots, you know, because there's 8 million Venezuelans outside of the country. So there is this sense that we need to participate in democracy. We need to do our part. Now the issue is going to be, well, there's NGOs in Venezuela. There's various human rights groups. There's activists and so forth. These are people who are very brave. They've been up against this regime for many years. The question is, how hard line is the crackdown going to be against these people? As you mentioned, there's already been people who have been killed in protests, and they've been rounding people up.
So based on your experience in the region, where do you think this ends up? I know that's a tough question to answer, and there's some speculation involved. But is Maduro going to just continue the crackdown, and then eventually we all get distracted and look elsewhere and worry about other things, and there he is for a full third term? Or do you think that these protests could build to the point where he's in danger?
You know, Mike, it's hard to say because it's too early right now, and we don't know how strong the military and the security apparatus is in terms of being fully behind him. They have been in the past, and it's important to note that the trade, these are people who've grown very rich. This regime has been very good to them, and they also know that if they turn against it, it is a brutal regime in terms of going against people who are ID'd as having gone against Maduro. We've seen this throughout history. So it's a little bit too early to say, but I have to say that this is Maduro's wounded. He's a wounded animal. I mean, this vote was an incredibly powerful message that anyone who is honest with themselves intellectually would say that this shows that the Venezuelan people revile this man. It was a clear cut result, and so that before the world seriously hurts his regime. The question is, what are the military men going to do? I mean,
Right.
you may have some colonels, some captains, some majors who don't believe in this, but they're thinking to themselves, do I really want to spend the rest of my life in prison or get myself killed here? That's the situation. That's the difficult situation and the difficult option that some of these people face.
And I think it's a great what you said about, they're all feeding at the same trough. And look, the question of loyalty within the military, we've seen that play out time and time again in different parts of the world when we're talking about dictators, when we're talking about potential for a coup or for the military to shift loyalties and realize that perhaps that time is up. So have you seen, and again, this is a tough question and not kind of a soft science, but in your work, and that of the team of Wall Street Journal reporters in the area, have you seen any cracks in that loyalty? In that is there any daylight at all that you've seen between the military and Maduro?
Not this week. Not this week. In terms of military high command, there are some lower level ex-soldiers, I should say, who've posted videos, but going against the regime and so forth. But we don't know if these people are in Venezuela or in Florida. We just don't know, and so there's very little information about that. I mean, in recent years, you have had thousands of desertions from the Venezuelan military. Many of those people, the Colombian National Police have told me that more than 10,000 have come to Colombia. Some of those people, of course, went on to Florida and to other countries and so forth. But you had a lot of ex-servicemen come into Colombia, into other countries, fleeing. And you certainly have had people in the high command who have left, and important intelligence agents and people like that. But not this time. I mean, it's a little bit too early right now, I think, and perhaps the crackdown is too ferocious to prod anyone or lead anyone to turn against the regime publicly. But we haven't seen anything at the moment.
Okay, yeah, that's fascinating. And then you have to ask yourself: are they fleeing because they simply want a better life? Are they fleeing because of disagreements and shifting sentiments with Maduro? Juan, if you wouldn't mind, stay right there. We've got actually another major story to discuss, and that's the release of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich from a Russian prison, along with 23 others, I should add, including former Marine. And it was a complicated multi-country negotiated deal involving 8 countries, including Germany, Poland, Slovenia, Norway, Belarus. So we'll be right back with that and with Juan Ferrero. If you've been paying attention to the financial news, and I hope that you have, because it's very important, experts are beginning to express concern that the U.S. dollar could lose its status as the world standard. Look, the warning signs are there. Saudi Arabia ending the petrodollar, Russia replacing U.S. dollars with the Chinese currency for trades, and BRICS nations attracting countries and getting them to move away from the U.S. dollar. The global de-dollarization trend, as we call it, is accelerating. And in times of uncertainty like these, gold is security. Call the proud Americans of the Patriot Gold Group today, before it's too late. Mention PDB, and you'll always get best-in-class service from Patriots protecting Patriots. Patriot Gold Group has the no-fee-for-life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver, and you may be eligible for the no-fee-for-life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Call 1-888-870-5457 for a free investor guide. Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer. Forget this, 7 years in a row. That's a lot of years in a row. Call 1-888-870-5457. Hey there. Are you overwhelmed with back taxes or unfiled returns? Hopefully not. But get this. With 88,000 newly hired agents, that's 88,000 of them, The IRS has increased enforcement, issuing millions of pay-up notices in 2024. Think about that. You walk out to your mailbox, it's a beautiful sunny day, you open your mailbox, and there's a pay-up notice from the IRS. Look, don't face IRS collection tactics alone. Tax Network USA can help. As the nation's premier tax relief firm, they've negotiated over $1 billion, that's with a B, in tax relief for clients. Services include penalty forgiveness, hardship programs, and offer-in compromise solutions. Look, whether you owe $10,000 or $10 million, how? You owe $10 million? Their experts can assist. Behind on taxes? Well, they can guide you in catching up. Protect your financial security. Contact Tax Network USA for strategic advice on reducing or eliminating your tax debt. Now, to schedule a complimentary consultation, call 1-800-245-6000 or visit tnusa.com. Look, don't let the IRS control your life. Empower yourself with Tax Network USA's support and take charge of your financial future. Visit tnusa.com today. Welcome back to the PDB Situation Report. I'm joined once again by Wall Street Journal South American Bureau Chief Juan Ferrero. Juan, we've been talking about Venezuela, of course, and we touched on, tangentially, the difficulties of covering this growing situation in Venezuela, with the protests possibly building, and where that could lead us because of, as you pointed out, journalists having to leave the country, and then Maduro and his cadre denying access, canceling flights, and that kind of ties in to a very happy story that I'm excited to talk to you about, and it's just always nice to talk about good news every now and then. The Situation Report covers a lot of crises, a lot of conflicts. So the return of Evan from Russia, along with several others. Talk to me about that. Talk to me about your feelings, the feelings of the newsroom. How's it playing out at the Wall Street Journal?
Well, people are just overjoyed. As you mentioned, it's good news in the midst of a lot of dark news globally. So to have our man back and free is just an amazing thing for the paper, because it was, the newspaper was really in crisis mode for 16 months since Evan Gershkovich's arrest in Russia. While he was reporting, he was, fully credentialed reporter based out of Moscow, and he was nabbed exactly for this purpose, to be part of some kind of prisoner exchange, which is exactly what happened.
Mm-hmm. Now, we talked about this before we had a chance to get started with the Situation Report, but you referenced the fact that this is not an uncommon activity in Venezuela. I mean, by that, sort of this hostage diplomacy idea of picking up innocents off the street from another nation and using them as leverage or trade bait. Talk to me about what's happened in Venezuela.
Yeah, well, Venezuela, first of all, is a very close ally of the Putin regime. And really, you have a series of allies, pariah states that work together. Russia, Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, etc. And these countries, especially like Venezuela, Iran, Russia, and so forth, I mean, they're one of their MOs is to, pick up citizens of the West, whether they're from the United States or Germany or Britain or wherever, and use them as pawns to get back spies and others that are arrested in the West. In Venezuela, we had a situation recently where the United States did do a pretty significant trade. A bunch of Americans who had been nabbed inside of Venezuela. These are guys who had gone there to do tourism, to meet girls. I mean, it was just a mix of things. A couple of servicemen and all that. They were traded for Venezuelans in the United States, and mainly the main person that Venezuela wanted was a guy named Alex Saab, who was Maduro's money man. This is the guy who basically was importing food and other stuff, and shaving a certain percentage off that, which would be shared with people in the regime and so forth. He was key in helping Venezuela break through a U.S. oil embargo on Venezuela in order to do business with other countries and so forth. He had been arrested in Cape Verde Island off the coast of Africa, and then eventually, after a long tug of war, the United States was able to get its hands on him. He'd been indicted in the U.S., and prosecutors were, they were building a case against him. But this deal with the United States, between the United States and Washington, led to his release, and he was greeted as a hero in Venezuela. Much as these ex-spies and so forth, there's an assassin in that group, were greeted as spies in Moscow by Putin, directly by Putin on the tarmac.
What does this mean when we see what happens, and including Venezuela, but obviously, top of the storyline now is what's happened in Russia with this hostage diplomacy, and how is that impacting journalism, right? I mean, your job is to travel the world, report on the facts, provide insight to the rest of the world that's not able to be on the ground and see what's happening. Is there a significant impact at this stage of the game? I mean, is the Moscow Bureau, as example, for Wall Street Journal, is that just shuttered at this point? Or how do you deal with this problem?
Yeah, I mean, the answer to your question is yes. I mean, we have to take special precautions. We do not have a presence in Russia. We cover Russia intensively, but our reporters are in Europe. They're in Eastern Europe. They're in London. They're all over the world, actually. I mean, there's obviously a lot that you can do by phone and encrypted messages and so forth. So we cover Russia intensively, but you can't have a person on the street, talking to ordinary folks, getting a feel for the color and so forth.
It sounds like, sorry, well, not to interrupt, but it sounds like when you say things like that out loud, it reminds me of sort of this concept of over-the-horizon capabilities for operations, right? For intelligence operations and military operations. And I know from experience that it can be done, but it's not anywhere near as effective.
Yeah. I mean, look, we have and continue to cover Venezuela with boots on the ground, and we have covered countries like Cuba and so forth, getting people in and out and so forth. So we actually just play it by ear, depending on the situation, depending on the story, etc. But I think media outlets do need to be careful in some of these countries because of that danger. I mean, we've seen in Iran, Washington Post journalist was jailed there, and that was a really long period of time. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 years, maybe more. This was a while ago now, but Iran holds a number of Americans, and the United States basically warns Americans against travel to a bunch of these countries. I mean, basically, the State Department says, don't go. I mean, the United States cannot legally bar an American for traveling wherever he or she wants to travel, but the United States strongly, recommends that Americans do not go. Obviously, it's a little bit different for journalists. I mean, in some places, there is a certain level of respect. In the case of Venezuela, for instance, Venezuela was providing visas for journalists to go. Not everyone. A lot of reporters were denied their visas to go for this election. But it also underscores something that I mentioned earlier, that maybe the Venezuelans thought they were going to win. They wanted to put on a show, And so in those kinds of events, I think that the level of security and so forth might be a little better. But it can also change on a dime, as it has in Venezuela right now, because suddenly Venezuela went from celebrating an election to cracking down on anyone who would question that Maduro won the vote.
Yeah, not dipping back in history for no reason, but a couple decades ago plus, I mean, the same thing happened in Algeria, right? The military there thought, what would be a good idea? So let's hold an election, and then they lost. And then they decided, not so much with the election. And that place descended into a very nasty situation for quite some time. It was very ugly. Very hopeful that the same doesn't happen in Venezuela. And Juan, I do hope that you'll come back, because I would love to kind of dip back in, take a look at the situation in Venezuela in a little bit of time, and also talk further about the region, because I firmly believe that South America does not get the attention that it should. from the U.S. administration, and also in general terms, awareness from the public. Juan Ferrero, South American Bureau Chief for the Wall Street Journal. Again, congrats, and such a happy day for everyone in Evans Wall Street Journal family. Thank you very much for joining us today, Juan.
Appreciate it.
Take care, sir. Well, that is all the time we have for the PDB Situation Report for today. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out at pdb@thefirsttv.com. Now, the PDB staff, including, of course, our crack team of interns, love getting your emails, your faxes, your beeper messages, your Western Union telegrams. And every month, we take a bunch of your questions, of course, and comments, and we include them in a monthly episode that we call, and it's a catchy word, or title, Ask Me Anything. Yeah, within reason, of course. To listen to the podcast of this show ad-free, become a premium member of the President's Daily Brief by visiting pdbpremium.com. And remember, the new episodes of the PDB Situation Report air every Friday at 10 p.m. on the First TV. And, of course, on all podcast platforms, and our juggernaut that is the YouTube channel, at President's Daily Brief. I'm Mike Baker. Until next time, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool.